If you've been arrested for drunk driving, the first call you need to make is to attorney Ted Morgan. You can't afford to go it alone. You need to know your rights. You need someone with the experience to put your DUI behind you. 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Call 706-317-5733. Ask for Ted.
Call Ted Morgan Law when you need a lifeline.
Hello and welcome back to DUI Law Real Talk with Ted Morgan. Ted is a seasoned trial attorney who has spent the last 30 years defending drivers in DUI and criminal cases in Georgia. I'm Shmika Rhymes, and in today's episode, we're talking about what happens when an out-of-state driver is charged with a DUI in Georgia and what changes and what doesn't. Welcome back, Ted.
Thank you, Ms. Rhymes. Glad to be back.
Glad to see you again. Well, let's talk about this. Ted, when someone from out of state is charged with a DUI in Georgia, what is the overall situation they're stepping into?
You know, from the DUI side, it's really not any different than the resident of Georgia, but from the licensing side, it's something that we really look at hard. Here in Columbus, we're right here with Fort Benning, Fort Moore. So, you know, we do see some soldiers or other people who work at the base who are from out of town, out of state. And, you know, what you got to remember is that Georgia is where the crime is where you're going to find out if you're DUI or not. But your licensing state being back home, California, they can take action once they receive word of the disposition, and they definitely will once the case is over. Then your home state is going to be notified, and then from there, depending on the outcome, is whether you face license suspension.
Well, what stays the same in terms of how Georgia handles a DUI case, regardless of where the driver is from?
Again, the actual DUI case is going to be handled the same, but what can affect the early stage, and I think too, it doesn't matter if you're out of state, when you are arrested for DUI, after all the field sobriety test, if they did any, whatever happened before arrest, now you're handcuffed, you're told I'm arrested for DUI. Georgia's going to read you a card, and that's what we call the implied consent advisement. And that's where the officer requests one more test. He wants either a blood draw, urine draw, or a breath test down usually at the jail. And so if you refuse that test, then Georgia takes the position that, hey, you gave your implied consent when you took the license or when you entered our state driving in our state on privileges given to you by another state. You agreed to give us that test. So now that you refused it, the officer can start an administrative license suspension case that moves out quickly and can be over with very quickly. You've got to get to an attorney to help you with that. In Georgia, it's 30 days, and after 30 days, if you hadn't done anything about it, you're facing a rough road on suspension of your privilege to drive in Georgia. So even though your California license is still valid, Georgia has suspended your privilege to drive in Georgia on that license.
Oh, okay. Well, what practical differences come up for someone who doesn't live in Georgia as they go through this process?
Well, for sure, if they were just passing through and they've gone back home, unless they're really close by, you know, one thing is you'd still have to come back to court. Not being a resident is not going to be an excuse to not appear in court. Maybe the occasional excuse, but yeah, that's the big practical thing is that, you know, if you're 2 hours away, or a plane ride away, you know, you got a problem because a lot of these courts will have you coming back 2 and 3 times at least before your case is concluded. So that's the biggest thing I think for most folks is they expect the attorney to be able to, hey, you know, because I am out of state and because it's a hardship, ergo I should be excused. And that's just not the way it works on a day-to-day basis. Otherwise, nobody would show up.
Well, we kind of already went over this, but I think it's worth talking about it again. But how do license consequences work? when the driver's license was issued in another state. Let's pick a state like New York.
Yeah. All right. Well, so I have to tell folks, look, I don't practice law in New York, or in fact, the only other state I'm licensed is Alabama because we're right next door to Alabama. But if you're a New York driver and you're arrested for DUI here, what I tell folks is first, have you moved here? Are you planning to move here? Because there may be some very good reasons to go ahead and switch your driver's license to Georgia at your earliest opportunity. Otherwise, if you leave it alone, then you get a bad result down here. Well, then New York's being notified. So that's one of the things I try to cover up front. And I'm not picking on the soldiers, but I'm saying they are a group that they are here, right here at Fort Benning, Fort Moore, but they're licensed probably from all over the country because they're not all from Georgia, and they're going to be here a while. So the soldiers and armed forces, they do not have to change their driver's license, even though they get PCS to a base in Georgia, but they can. And so what I tell them is, hey, it might be a real good idea for you to go ahead and change your driver's license if you know you're going to be here for a few years. Then I can tell you what's going to happen with your driver's license and how we can beat that or how we can minimize that for you. So that's really the practical side of the out-of-state licensed driver arrested here in Georgia.
So you can still switch your license over if you've been arrested for DUI.
Yes, it's really your obligation is if I've come to Georgia from New York and the test is basically, is this your permanent residence now? Even though I may be planning to go back to New York next week and pack up a bunch of stuff, once, it's determined that, hey, Georgia is my new home, then technically under Georgia law, then it's triggered. I think it's 30 days you have to change your driver's license to Georgia. And I imagine New York has a very similar provision for folks moving to New York. And so that has nothing to do with whether I've been arrested.
Well, how do Georgia and a person's home state interact when it comes to reporting or enforcing DUI-related penalties?
Yeah, great question. And it can be horrible if you can't handle this properly, because you've got a criminal case in Georgia, and if you have a bad result, technically Georgia will suspend your privilege to drive in this state is one possibility. Oftentimes what happens, and is what is supposed to happen, is that the clerk of the court where you are, the clerk is the record keeper for the court. And so once your case is over, they notify the home state, and they have that information because it's on your citation, your New York driver's license, your name, and all that. And there is I call it just a cooperation among all of the 50 states in the union, and they share this database basically. But now with the digital, the clerk usually can just submit it straight to, say, the New York Department of Motor Vehicles or whatever the agency is in New York that issues driver licenses. So they send the disposition of the DUI case, and then you say, well, big deal, I didn't get it in New York. Well, Georgia and many other states in the union, their DUI law, somewhere in there, buried in there, it's going to say, if you are convicted of DUI in this state or in another state under a similar law. Okay. So that encapsulates, and catches you. So now they get notice that you got a DUI in Georgia. They treat it as if you got a DUI in New York, not for purposes of punishment. They can't punish you again, but they can treat your licensing as if you got it there. So now you're going to get suspended based on the same thing that would happen to a New York resident who got a DUI. Is it your first or second or third? And that's where folks, I think, get confused, is that You won't be punished as in jail or fines by New York, but you will have license consequences based on New York law. What do we do to someone convicted of a DUI?
Well, you mentioned this a little bit before, but I thought we'd circle back. But what challenges come up when someone is trying to manage a Georgia DUI case while living in another state? Are they able to appear in court virtually, or what other challenges come up?
Yeah, I think a lot of that has gone away.
Mhm.
During COVID, there was tons of it. But the courts I go to around Georgia now, and we cover probably about 10 different counties, nobody's doing that anymore. I think there were some judges who, some of them local here, they loved it during COVID and they wanted to continue doing it for, different reasons. But
Yeah.
by and large, you're not gonna be able to attend court virtually on a regular basis. You might be able to do it. Maybe some of the metro Atlanta counties, they may have some systems set up for that. But what I find is that most courts in criminal cases, they want the defendant to appear for a different reason. And it's because the defendant, the accused, they can fire me at any time. So they want the defendant in court when they tell me as the attorney and the defendant, okay, now your next court date is in 3 months on May the 1st. They want the defendant to be there and hear that. So then if he fires his lawyer a week later, he still knows he has a court date.
Mhm.
And that means if you don't show, then they don't have any problem issuing a bench warrant. So the virtual appearance is somewhere in between there, but I think a lot of counties, probably across the nation, it's a matter of resources to provide that. And if you've ever been in a big crowded courtroom and you got a little TV monitor with somebody appearing virtually, that's not very easy for everybody and who needs to participate in that hearing to handle that. They do a lot of virtual appearances sometimes for jail cases where people are in jail, they can't get out for whatever reason. But that's about the extent of it. It's what I see right now.
Okay. Well, how do court appearances and travel requirements typically work for someone who lives out of state? Are they required to be there for every appearance? I don't know how many appearances they may have.
Technically, yes. You're required to be in court whether you have an attorney. And let's just start with that general rule. Then after that, it might depend on the judge. It might depend on the prosecutor or both, where sometimes I can call and say, hey, Prosecutor Smith, look, you know where we are on this case, and my client has moved back to California. Are you okay with me coming and us having this status conference or whatever it is, and not require my client to come back from California? And a lot of times that's how I do it. And, we get an answer and then we can tell our client. But here's the funny thing is, it's really not up to the prosecutor, it's up to the judge. But sometimes when we know the prosecutor is not going to ask for a bench warrant, then when the judge says, well, your client's not here, then we kind of try to smooth it over with, well, Judge, Prosecutor Smith and I talked, and he lives in California and he's in touch with me. There's no problems here. But he's a long ways away and he works 40 hours a week. And most of your judges are not going to be upset with that unless the defendant's present is necessary for what we're trying to do at that hearing. Obviously there, you better have him present.
Where do out-of-state drivers tend to get confused about how a Georgia DUI case works?
I don't want to say it's just out-of-state drivers. I think it's back to some of the stuff we talked about that, they somehow think that because they had to go home because I have a job in New York or wherever, that somehow gives them a legal excuse, and it just doesn't. And sometimes they get upset with us thinking that, we can't pull a string. But most folks understand that, hey, this isn't a common legal excuse that we can take advantage of. And for a lot of the same reasons we just talked about, is that the court wants the defendant in the courtroom.
Hmm. Have you ever had someone say, I just don't have the money to get back there?
Yep. Yep. Sometimes that's the deal, and you just play to the heartstrings of the prosecutor and the judge. Sometimes we can just make a motion to, hey, can we continue this hearing? Meaning, can we postpone it? And sometimes we'll just say in there, my client is a situation where they literally cannot be here. But saying that you don't have money to get there, sometimes that it brings up a legal question, but more often than not, the judge is going to say, hey, you know what, Greyhound bus or get in your car and drive. You had enough money to get here once, you can do it again. It kind of falls on deaf ears at some point.
Well, when someone's out of state, how does that start to influence how their case is approached early on?
Well, we do try to approach it and think about just what we've been talking about, logistically. Where are you going to be? Are you going back home? Okay, you're going back home. How hard is it going to be for you to get here? And we try to let them know as soon as we can when they have a court date. Muskogee County here, where I am, can be easier to deal with than some of the counties up the road that are not so easy to deal with on that. But you just have to plan a little better. But mainly, you just got to tell the client, look, there's limitations to how much I can help you on this, other than get you the dates and tell you to be here. So yeah, it's not a fun situation when they're a long ways away.
Well, Ted, this has been a great conversation, very informative. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, yeah, thank you for having me again. I really enjoyed it, and I hope our viewers and listeners do too.
Well, that's it for today's episode of DUI Law Real Talk. If you or someone you know is facing a DUI in Georgia but lives out of state, visit tedmorganlaw.com to schedule a consultation with Ted. And don't forget to like, leave a review, and subscribe to the show so you don't miss the next episode. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.